Perhaps he's the one who's not human, he doesn't place himself among humans. But if he genuinely liked an ungrateful person, it was him. I think that if he's not an atheist and prays each morning when he wakes up and prays, he should also pray for Africans, because it is thanks to our ancestors that he exists today in France. He should be praying to us too. In his eyes, we shouldn't just be humans, we are more than humans.
French President Emmanuel Macron recently expressed frustration over the perceived lack of gratitude from certain African nations for France's military interventions against Islamist militants in the Sahel region. Speaking at an annual foreign policy conference, he remarked that these countries forgot to thank France, suggesting that without French military support, they might have lost their sovereignty. Macron's comments have been met with strong reactions from African leaders. Chad's foreign minister, Abderrahmane Koulamala, criticized the remarks as reflecting a contemptuous attitude towards Africa and Africans, emphasizing the need for mutual respect. Similarly, Senegal's Prime Minister, Ousmane Sonko, highlighted France's past actions that have destabilized certain African countries, asserting that France lacks the legitimacy to ensure Africa's security and sovereignty. These exchanges occur amid a backdrop of shifting military dynamics in the region, with several African nations re-evaluating their defense agreements with France and calling for the withdrawal of French troops. However, the latest criticism has come from the president of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traore.
All opportunities exist to understand imperialism and its manifestations. When I take recently the statements of Emmanuel Macron on Africa, well, every African conscious should therefore quickly understand what he has said and what it means. General Tierney said not long ago that there was a change of tactics or strategy of French forces in Africa, and I think it was to confirm this. It is about dissolving and keeping a core set up. Emmanuel Macron said it so well that we can only thank him for his sincerity, even if some wanted to deceive their population, but reality will eventually catch up with them. They won't leave certain countries, they have simply dissolved the setup. You won't see them in bases anymore, but in embassies, they will be there, constituting security companies to secure their societies existing in those countries. They will be there, but you won't see them in uniform or gathered in bases anymore. That's all it means. They will reorganize themselves, but they will still be present. He spoke of courtesy towards certain heads of state by giving them priority to announce the rupture or departure of French forces. It doesn't matter, we can say this, but what we know is that if you want a break with these imperialist forces, it's simple, denounce the agreements. Everything starts there. I think the example of Chad, at least, is clear. They started by denouncing the agreements. If we don't denounce these agreements, just say that the bases are leaving, and nothing has been done, because the problem lies in the colonial defense agreements signed since independence. The most dangerous ones are not those on display at the bases, the most dangerous ones are the military advisors. These military advisors exist in all these countries. They also existed in Burkina Faso until late 2022, until we took responsibility for them. Who are these military advisors? They are the ones who are supposed to implement France's policy here. They should work towards making our armies very weak so that France can always claim its existence here. Compared to others, they had succeeded. Our sentries were guarding with sticks. That's what France wants from our armies. When we reach that stage, we have no choice but to want them to take over. However, the Burkina army has managed to get rid of these military advisors at some point. Unfortunately, I think in 2019, after Operation Otawano, where the French saw that the Burkina army still had the capacity to react against terrorism, they called the chief of staff in France and instructed him to rehire the military advisors throughout the structure. He refused, but on his return home, the politicians instructed him to accept the military advisors. That's when the military advisors returned to the Burkina army in 2019. With all the consequences we know, the army was on the verge of disappearing between 2020 and 2021. And in fact, it's during this period that many soldiers had to desert because there was no longer any hope left. We were on the verge of collapse. That's roughly how they work. At the General Staff of the Armed Forces, in all army headquarters, in schools, it's them who are supposed to set the policy for our army. It's them who tell us how many recruits to hire, when to hire, and what needs to be done. They're in schools telling us how soldiers should be trained, and so on. As long as these military advisors are there, you won't be independent. Your army will just have the appearance of being a proper army doing parades, but when war comes, you'll realize that the parade is one thing and war is another. We need to break these agreements. It's the only way to have an independent army and build strength from scratch. But many people don't understand this, and even with these agreements, France chooses to send trainee officers to our countries to be trained. This goes against the same agreements. In reality, most of the officers go to France to serve the French state in their own country. They don't come here to serve our countries, they train them so they can serve France. French interests. I want proof of this. When we revolted in Burkina Faso, many officers who had been trained in France were immediately contacted to tell them it was time for them to take action because they were trained to serve French interests. Most of these officers informed us, we took note and continue to follow their guidance. When an officer trained in France arrives back home, and unfortunately either by accident or on the battlefield, in France, there's a night of remembrance for fallen soldiers like everywhere else. On this night of remembrance, we mention the name of the officer in question, and say, died for France. They don't train them to serve their country, they train them to serve their state. And there are many African states with such officers. How many of them are patriots? Only God knows. This is a lesson given by Emmanuel Macron to African leaders that they need to catch up and truly lead the fight against imperialism. But on top of this, he also insulted all Africans in his comments. There's a part that caught my attention where he talked about ingratitude and said ingratitude is a non-contagious disease among humans. He, being human, our ingratitude isn't contagious to him. That's how this gentleman views Africa and Africans. We're not considered humans in his eyes. Perhaps he's the one who's not human, he doesn't place himself among humans. But if he genuinely liked an ungrateful person, it was him. I think that if he's not an atheist and prays each morning when he wakes up and prays, he should also pray for Africans, because it is thanks to our ancestors that he exists today in France. He should be praying to us too. In his eyes, we shouldn't just be humans, we are more than humans. Those messages are very powerful. I cry for the French people. Still, he is good for Africa. He's bad but necessary for us. Those who want to wake up, will wake up. And those who don't want to wake up, like they say, can't be woken up if they are not asleep. Africans need to wake up. We must work towards being independent and making our people know happiness. And the fight against imperialism is that. We need to decolonize our minds, take into account all those factors because the world gives us many examples to see. They don't have morals, they can label you a terrorist today, but tomorrow, you're a hero. By their own mouths, they decide what they do. They talk about democracy, but they stage constitutional coups among themselves. They talk about human rights, but they slaughter populations elsewhere. The African must wake up, Africa must wake up. And the fight against imperialism is permanent. I invite you to join this struggle, to work so that we are truly free, independent, self-sufficient people, and we can develop ourselves, know happiness, the very thing our people strive for. Thank you, I wish you a very good day, a very good week, and a very good year. And by the end of this year 2025, when we reflect on our progress, we must tell ourselves that we have made significant contributions to our nation. Thank you very much to all. May God bless you and may God protect our beloved homeland. The homeland or death, we will prevail.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoy getting the latest news from Ibrahim Traore, make sure to subscribe to World Lens. Please like this video, so that the YouTube algorithms can be forced to show it to others. Let everyone know that Captain Traore cannot be stopped.